Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show you how I use Blender to make some of my figure, and particularly how I use Blender to do this kind of cartoonish schematic that I use in the first figure of some of my paper. I'm going to show you actually how, once you have set up your model, how actually it can make your life much easier to generate this kind of like pretty nice figure that you can import in Illustrator. If you're not familiar with Blender, when you open Blender, usually that's what you're going to be seeing. A simple square, simple cube, a camera, and a light source. To navigate through Blender, it's really easy. If you use your middle mouse button and you press it, you can actually rotate around the 3D cursor. You can zoom and unzoom with the wheel, and you can pan if you keep pressing Shift and mouse center mouse button. You can pan around and move stuff. So for a more detailed type of beginner approach to Blender, I'll let you look through YouTube. There's plenty of video. But for the moment, I'm just going to show you how actually we create this kind of photonic structure. So to start with, we can get rid of this square. We absolutely don't need this cube. And we're going to start by creating our Microring Resonator by introducing a cylinder. Anytime you try to look for stuff in Blender, usually the solution is a space key that you will be able to see basically everything that is in the menus, but you can be able to search, or you can just type cylinder, add cylinder, press enter, and it's going to pop one. You will have this menu where all the parameters of the cylinder are available. In our case, we're just going to pump it up to 100. It's not fully needed. I just kind of prefer it, kind of make it kind of smoother, at least psychologically for me, because Blender has actually a way to smooth all these vertices, so it's not that rugged. It has either a shade flat, which is our case here, or it can actually shade smooth or shade auto smooth. If you do shade smooth, you're going to lose actually this very sharp edge at the top and bottom of the cylinder. If you do auto smooth, it's automatically gonna select enable this option where any angles that are larger than the angles set here, 30 degree, is gonna be rendered as flat, and so you will still have this kind of like very sharp edge at the top and bottom that we're still looking for. All right, so a Microring Resonator has an hollow core. So to do that, we're gonna start creating it by selecting our cylinder and going into edit mode. Edit mode can be triggered here or simply through the tab key, where you will actually be able to either edit every vertices, every edge, or every faces. And here you can filter it through these three icons here. We stay in faces selection, select the top, the bottom, and we're gonna introduce new faces by pressing I and moving the mouse, and it's going to automatically create this new edge, which is actually faces from inside, where we will be able to set up our ring width. So let's say we want our ring width to be about that size. You can set obviously everything here, and actually we're going to round it up to 0.2 to make it kind of nicer. And now that we have that, we can cut it by bridging all the edge loops. By doing that, we actually remove all this thing, it bridges from top to bottom, and now we have this nice hollow core system. Can go back to object mode, and that's the base for our Microring Resonator. Of course, the radius usually is much larger than the thickness, so we need to adjust that. You can go in this little arrow here that's going to pull a little tab, and you can change the dimension here, and we can divide it by 10, so 0.2. And now we have what looks much more like a Microring Resonator. All right, so one thing in the real world, and every time you try actually to kind of like render something with Blender or model something with Blender, that these sharp edges here never actually exist. Like it's not reality. So you always want to create some kind of like little curvature of bevel, and Blender has a very nice way to create all this bevel through this modifier tab here, where you can essentially modify in a non-destructive fashion your model. So here you go add modifier bevel, and when you do that, it looks not that great. Like your bevel is actually not really good, and that's most of the time when that happens is because your scale here is wrong, and because we have shrunk the height of our system by a factor of 10, now the scale here is 0.1. So to fix all the bevel and all that, you do Control A, and you apply either the scale or transformation, so it's easier this way. And now that all the scales are correct, we do have a bevel of 0.1 meter. It's kind of an issue. It looks more like a wedge resonator, depending what you're doing, actually could be useful. But to actually create a much more rounded edges, we need to increase the number of segments. It's here 20, for instance, and we have this thing. Bevel is still it's way too big. We can divide it by 10, so 0.01. And now we get this very nice subtle type of edge that is show a bit of a bevel. Right. So that's essentially how you create a ring. It's very simple, and from there we will go into the material, introduce waveguide and all this kind of stuff. But what if actually your microring is not that standard and shows a type of corrugation like what we do in our group, for instance, with photonic crystal microring? So to do that, it's kind of like the same system. You start with a cylinder, same fashion, 100, all this kind of thing. We're going to shade it all the smooth. We're going to reduce the size, apply the scale. And here, instead of introducing new faces to actually create the hollow core, we're going to create another cylinder. This time with less vertices, it's going to define the periodicity of our corrugation. So let's go for 40 here, for instance. And what we will do is actually shrink it a bit. So to shrink, you press the key S, and it's going to shrink it in every direction. If you want to simply shrink it along the Y-X plane, Shift Z, and it will only do it in the XY plane. So we can shrink it about that size, let's say. It's going to be like the minimum ring width of our system. That's good. Apply scale. Like this, we will not run any problem. So now we're going to create our corrugation. And to do that, go into edit mode, select edges, and we're going to select every other edges. We shift, click. I'm not going to do that manually. There's way too many. So what you can do is Control Shift plus, and essentially it's going to repeat whatever selection you have done. All right, let's go on top view, scale along the XYZ plane, and we can just drag our mouse to create the corrugation. So we want maybe like a corrugation amplitude that is about that size. We don't want something too crazy. Just click, and now you have your system that is the basis to do a Boolean operation. I told you there's a lot of modifiers available, so you can select the microring, what will be the microring, and that we can rename actually. So PHC ring. This one will be PHC modulation, so we kind of know where we're at. Select the PHC ring, add a modifier, and we will look for a Boolean. So it's already on different, that's great, and the object that we want to subtract is PHC modulation, and you can see that all of a sudden we have this inner wall that has been created. Modulation is still seen, so we want to hide that, and we also don't want to forget to disable it in render. We don't want to have like this thing popping up at the very end when we will do that. And so now we have our modulated inner ring. Since this modulation still exists, what we can do is we can edit it, and the modifier, the Boolean modifier, is going to take care of doing the subtraction in real time. So having selected the PHC modulation, what we can say is like go on top, zoom a bit, and add a modifier and a bevel because we want to smoothen the edges. All right, so that's kind of like way too big, obviously, so 0.01, and we're going to do 20 segments. It's still way too big, so 0.02, for instance. And from there, we can kind of like adjust how we want to actually smoothen all that. I think we can probably go to 0.3. Let's see, 0.3, how it looks. Still too little, so 0.04. Start to look not too bad, and we can go to 0.05. All right. If we want also to have a finer control, we can also change the profile. So let's say the shape size, which either go from much more sharp to very, very, very smooth. So what we want is probably something around 0.55. It's going to create this almost sine type of function of the inner wall. From there, we have our simple things. And we can select back our photonic crystal ring, and now add the bevel, put it at what we wanted before with 20, and so now we have a nice little, I'm gonna pump it up a bit, 0.02, maybe 0.01. All right, and we have a nice bevel both on the outer edge and on the inner edge. All right, that's pretty cool. So to see how it's gonna look in a render, you have to look at through the eye of the camera. And an easy way to do so is click 0, and that's what you get. We're kind of far, we don't really see the microring super nice now. So one way to do that would be to simply move the camera, you select it, G, and you move it around. It's not super nice. What you can do is like, go back at the view of the camera, make sure you selected G, and actually start locking the axis. So if you press Z, it's going to move along the Z direction of your whole system, X along X, and Y along Y, all right? But what you can do is double click it, and it's going to move along the axis of the object. So let's say if you do ZZ, it's going to move along the axis of the object, where Z is actually the direction where the camera looks like. So you can simply then, after move and kind of like zoom in a very, very, very simple fashion. And if you want to rotate them, you would press R, and you can do Z. That's not super nice because you're kind of like missing actually the microring. So one way you can do is actually where you want to start moving, the median point. You want to rotate around the 3D cursor, R, Z, and now we can actually rotate along the system. So we're going to play a lot more with that later on. All right, so that's kind of what it's going to look like. And obviously in this kind of structure, we always have some kind of waveguide that coupled to it. An easy way to do that would be just introducing a cube. So the correct thickness, 0.2. Let's make it square. And here is going to be 4. We apply the scale, so there is never an issue. We move it to cover it, and voila, you have some straight waveguide ring system. And obviously, if you would like the waveguide to go beyond, you can just move it a bit and then scale it, and it's going to go beyond the frame of the camera. And of course, you can still add whatever bevel you want. So still the same amount, 20. Here it's weird because we still need to apply the scale again. And you have this kind of system that is very, 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 very basic. May works for you, but a lot of time we actually use this kind of like pulley type coupling. That is a bit more complicated to model, but I'm going to show you that you can make one very, very easy. So we can remove this guy. So to delete it, just X, delete. And we're going to add another cube. This time still the same. So square cross section. Here we're going to do 1 and 0.02, 0.2, sorry. Apply the scale. And that's kind of nice. So what we're going to move, actually, we're going to set the origin actually to this facet. It's going to be much more convenient later on. So that means I need to move it along Y by 0.5. Apply 0.5. And if we apply all transformation, now my origin is set over there. So we would want this pulley to wrap around here. So just for the sake of putting some waveguide, some visual guide where this pulley will be, we can simply add like a simple circle with a diameter, let's say, of 1.1. So it's going to tell us kind of like where the pulley will have to write. Okay, so we move this guy. Now we're going to move it by 1.1 plus half of the width. So plus 0.1, of course, wrong sign. And so that means our pulley will wrap in this direction. All right. So we go into edit mode. We can select the facet, and we can actually get rid of only the face. I went too fast. I removed the vertex. Only delete the face. All right. Don't do the other way. Now we can simply select all this thing. So for that, you just click Alt and click the edge. It's going to loop it around. And we're going to spin it. And when you spin, it creates this huge mess that at first doesn't look super good, but everything is you can parameterize everything. So the axis around its spin, we want to be Z, so 0, 0, 1. So now we can see it spin pretty nicely around that. We don't want 360 degree. Here we probably want something like 45. Wrong direction, so just flip the sign of Z. And maybe we want kind of like a better, kind of like smoother type of stuff. So let's put 20 here, okay? And that's gonna be kind of like the basis of our pulley. And it's gonna wrap this way, and then it's gonna unwrap this way. To unwrap, we do the same, spin. It spin once again, kind of like crazy direction. So we're just gonna do 0, 0, -1. And so this time we don't want the center to be where it used to be. We want this center to be offset over here since it's gonna wrap this way. And trigonometry, so it's gonna be radius of it's gonna be 2 times the radius of the pulley. So it's gonna be 2 times 1.2 times sine of 45 degrees. So square root of 2 divided by 2. And there's gonna be some minus here. I'm gonna do that, all right? Same for y. And so now we have wrapped the other way. It's really convenient. Anytime you have math equation or stuff like that, you can just type cos, square root, you can type all this kind of stuff, and just Blender is going to take care of it. We have enough steps, and we want to have a 45-degree again. So this time, just flip it, and it's going to unwrap really nicely. All right. So now we have our pulley. We can simply continue as a straight waveguide. So to do that, we just extrude whatever we have already selected here. So you press E, and it's gonna extrude it kind of like any way you want. So you want to extrude it along Y, press Y, and just move it around, and it's fine. As we work only on half of the pulley, we need to get rid of this thing. So here we can just select them all. So you can go into transparency, select, and you just set vertices, remove the transparency, and we're all set. We have half of our pulley. Great. And as you can see, it's wrapped really well in a very kind of like circular fashion over the ring that we want. We can get rid of this guide here that was just like a basic curve. And now we need to create actually the other half. To that, modifier, mirror, we don't want it in X, we want it in Y. And so now we have our whole pulley that, if you look from the camera, looks actually pretty nice. We should not forget to shade it smooth so we don't get this weird stuff. And now we can also apply a basic bevel. And we have our system that is consistent. As easy as that. Once again, this guy, I'd like to put it out of the frame. It's not that nice. So what you will do here, just go back to edit mode, select these edges here, and just move it away. And as it's a mirror, it's going to push the other one away. All right, so we're good. Now we have this kind of like very nice type of structure. But if we look at rendering that, which is this button, just to have like a preview, that's not very nice. That's not exactly what we would want. We still want this kind of like cartoonish type of aspect. So that means we need to work on the material. Plus, whenever we're going to render, it's going to be this weird type of gray color that is not exactly the best, right? So, two stuff. First, how to make a perfect white background. To make a perfect white background, we go into shader editor, world. So you will get this kind of like nodes. If you're not familiar with nodes in Blender, once again, plenty of video on YouTube. Feel free to go look at it. It's really something that you should really get kind of comfortable working with. So essentially that color will tell you what kind of like background will be. So that's not what we want. What we would want is to have a background that is perfectly white. Right? It's not exactly white here. Blender doesn't like to put exactly white all the time, so just push it all the way. And if you can't select now, it's crazy because the whole light and stuff have been crazy and you actually don't see your system anymore. So what you want is you want to make sure when the light path is correct, that it shows the background, and when the light path is not correct. So what you will want is to add an input, and it's going to be light path. All right. And we're going to mix that with shader, mix shader, all right, where we're going to mix the regular background. That didn't create some crazy color on our system and mix it with his camera array. And so now we have what used to be the nice color that we know our ring is from the standard background with the white background, with a perfect white background. And so by mixing them both, actually we get that. All right, cool. So now you've been introduced with everything that is related to nodes, or you're going to start working on the object and all the material. You can also work on that with this tab over here. And so we're going to start working with the photonic crystal. Like I said, we want this kind of cartoonish feeling. So you can just create a new material. Here we're going to call it silicon nitride, just for the sake of remembering what it is. And automatically what you will get is that with a principal BSDF, and you can set the color. It's not what we want here. We're just going to remove it. And so we're going to just start by doing a diffuse one. So you go into diffuse BSDF, you add it. The color here actually is not going to matter much, so it's fine. You add a shader. Shader to RBG, all right? And so what we're going to create here is actually this kind of like shadow that are very cartoonish, all right? So we connect this one here and a color ramp that we can simply connect. Essentially, that lets you choose how you want your shadow to be impacted. For instance, if you want really something only very dark and only kind of like the bevel to show off, it's kind of like white bevel, which, by the way, if we didn't have the bevel, you would see that this very nice kind of like white edge wouldn't show. So that's why it's also important to kind of like introduce some kind of like realistic element to have this kind of like nice render. So of course we don't want some kind of like crazy stuff like that. So I'm just gonna put it in ease first, and then what I'm gonna do is simply copy a color that I already kind of like, which is kind of like this bluish type of system, and a lighter one over there, so not exactly white, this way. All right. So one thing that is also important when you're going to start working with color is making sure that actually your color are rendered correctly. To do that, you're going to render, film. This is not film, it's color management. We're going to go to film later. And what you will need to change is AGX. AGX, in my opinion, is terrible. You want to go to standard, and you want to go to medium high contrast. There's no reason to stay with AGX. I bet AGX is very useful if you do some kind of like crazy 3D animation, Toy Story like. That's absolutely not what we're doing here. So stick with that. It's good. And so that's nice. So now we can kind of like do some kind of like light shading, but it's not exactly what we want. We would like to kind of like make this white bevel a bit stronger. So we want that to be essentially glossy. So we just add a glossy. We do duplicate these two shader. Just connect this guy. And so if we do just connect the output directly to this glossy thing, you will see that you get this very nice bevel that is kind of like something that we want, right? So how to get the best of both worlds? Well, you just put a mix. So you just want a mix color, and you put it here. All right. So of course, if you mix, it's going to be kind of weird. So instead of like mix, we will do multiply. And you can see that now it's getting not too bad. We get at the same time this nice bevel without being like completely dark and too glossy, and you can start controlling this kind of thing. One thing that is very important to do this kind of render with the material now will be actually the light, which in our case, the light is all up here, doesn't do much. It's more like kind of like a sun type of stuff. So what we want is, first of all, change it into an area. I'm gonna change it of 1 by 1 meter. And I'm gonna tune it down to like 400 watts, all right? If you go back there already, it did change quite a bit. So we're gonna bring this guy down because it's way too high. and we're gonna bring it closer. If we look at what the camera now looks like, we can see that we have like a much better kind of like shading with a nice white bevel here. And we can probably still kind of like work a bit on that. So if we bring it a bit closer, let's say here, we change a bit the rotation of the system. Starting to look like something that is kind of better. I think it's the bevel is a bit too high, so I'm probably gonna just move it along here. And do it just this way. All right, that's a bit better. We can also definitely rotate it across here to make it just this part of the shade kind of darker, or like we still get this nice bevel here and over there. All right, obviously the waveguide now is totally, we cannot see it, but we'll work on that a bit later. One thing of like kind of like cartoonish type of render is that they always have kind of like an outlining of everything. So that's what we're going to create. So to do that, we're just going to do create another slot, all right, to create another material, right? And so just going to do this one, and we're going to rename it, this one, into our outline, right? We want the outline to be kind of plain, so it's just going to be an emission one, and the emission one just going to be kind of like this kind of color that I saved before. So it's still kind of a blue, a bit of a darker blue than what the ring is made of, and just set it to the surface. So obviously now we are not seeing anything because actually this material, if you want, is kind of like hidden behind. What we need to do is actually solidify our system. So when we create solidify, what's going to happen is that it allows you to actually create a shell of your system. So if you do 0.1, you will see that it's kind of like inflate your whole system. We obviously don't want that to be that big, so we go back to 0.01. The normals need to be flipped, high quality. And when things become important is like the material offset. So it's going to tell you which kind of material you want to use for this effect. And here we want to offset it by 1 and actually use our second material. And that's what it looks like. That's not great because it can remove everything. So what we want is just the outline, which in Blender is called backface curling. If you click that, now it just creates a basic outline. And that's exactly what we wanted. Something we want to make sure of is like we want to make sure that actually of a blend and there is no shadow because we don't want that to become kind of like darker just because we put the outline. All right, we can do exactly the same with a waveguide. 2 slot, first slot, select the silicon nitride, second slot, select the outline. We solidify the whole system. 1, normal flip, high quality, material offset, 1, and we get the outline. That is kind of like not too bad, right? It starts to look like a bit what we had in mind to do something kind of cartoonish, right? So of course, maybe like the angle of the camera is actually not something that you want. You want something a bit more like from below, from on the side and all that. So you can just, as we did earlier, just select the camera, move it around, select whatever angle you want. And that's why it becomes so powerful once you have set up your system, because you can create a lot of different views that if you just work with Illustrator, you almost need to start from scratch again. While here you can just select, okay, I want to have like something that is like, let's say from kind of this side, kind of like it here, but let's say a bit more from top. So you can just decide to like do it this way here. And you get a pretty nice system. And obviously we can start moving the light around because now we want like the shadow to be kind of different. So you can maybe have something a bit like that. So it's kind of like create a shadow. And you get this kind of like pretty nice system actually, where everything's become really easy to change. You don't have to spend a large amount of time just for doing some like basic modification, right? So that's the idea. And from there, you can straight up, if you want, basically export your system. You can obviously do it much more fancier with like all this kind of like crazy lightning and all this kind of stuff. It's really up to you. But you can also just go here, render image, and you're basically done. As you can see, it's like not great, very, very pixelized. So you kind of need to actually work a bit more on that. So let's say I want to put back my camera at a different angle. Kind of want to put it back here. I'm going to put back camera here. Render, you want to increase the sampling a bit, let's say times 4. Viewport, you can keep it this way, doesn't really matter. But that's really on the size. Right now it's essentially a 1080 pixel type of system, type of image. You need to do times 4. You've got to shrink it, so you need to do times 4 also on the y-axis. And when you do that, it seems to be kind of the same type of camera frame, but it's actually not the same at all. You can also work with the camera. So if you go on the camera here, you can start working a lot on different things. So for instance, you can have a focal length that is 70, that sometimes is a bit more realistic depending what you want. I know 50 is very much like the gold standard for everything photography. But if you know photography, that's really kind of like where everything starts shining, where you can have like depth of field if you want to do some kind of like bokeh effect. You could have like some like weird sensor type of stuff or some background image, all this kind of like crazy stuff, right? Here, I'm not going to touch it too much because I don't want to have like some kind of like crazy realistic effects, still kind of like cartoonish. You could go into orthographic if you want, which is very much like blueprint type of thing. Here, we're going to stay in perspective. All right, so now that we have set the camera correctly, the resolution that we want and everything, we can just render it, render image. And now it's going to be this kind of like very big. Let me resize the window. It's kind of big. It is kind of like very nice one, which actually the resolution now is much, 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 much better. Okay, cool. And the background is perfectly white. But sometimes you actually don't want to have a white background. Sometimes you want to actually have a transparent background. Let's say you import in Illustrator and you're going to have like all this kind of like stuff that you want to do. For example, in this kind of system where like I added a lot of arrows, all these kind of like things, and I kind of want to keep it actually as with a transparent background so it's not too annoying when I work with Illustrator. To do that, you will simply have to go into the film setting of the render, click transparent. And so I think anything that you have done actually in the world render here now basically don't do anything anymore. But when you render it, it's going to be a transparent background that will be very convenient to import into Illustrator and all this kind of stuff. To save it, very easy. You do fill, save as. You just save it wherever you want, and you save it. I already saved it before when I tried it. Just make sure to select RGBA. Otherwise, that's going to be a huge issue. If you just select RGB, it's not going to save as a white background. RGB, you reduce this and you just save the image. And now you're all good with your pulley. And yeah, that's all you want. And of course, from there, you can do a lot of addition if you want. You can obviously add some kind of like light, all this kind of thing. Here, it's really the basics that I will show you. If you want to add, for instance, some kind of like light that is modulated, since you have access to, for instance, basic curve, you can very easily create, for instance, like this kind of like modulation where like you can have this very simple Bezier circle. You subdivide it, let's say 10. You're going to select them all, check out deselect. So you select only 1 out of 2, move it in Z. And so now you have a very nice light that is modulated, a nice background. You can obviously, as it's a Bezier, kind of like move it around. So that means you can like bevel it a bit. So you can do a bevel that is 0.01, and now it has created this nice little light. You can move it around. Everything is parameterized. If you go into render, gonna be this not super nice material. Obviously, you can work with that. You can change it. So it's a slot here, outline. I'm gonna actually duplicate it because it's not the color I want. Obviously, I don't want this dark blue. Let's go for like some kind of like let's go some kind of like more purplish stuff, like maybe something kind of like that, kind of like lighter. Yeah, let's go for something like that. All right, and you can do exactly the same stuff. That means like everything that I've shown you is super helpful for everything. Essentially, you can solidify, you can reduce that a bit, normal, flip, high quality, material. Oops, we forgot to add the second slot, which is the basic outline. And so now, material one, that's true. We need to remove the backfast scaling. And so now you can really have this kind of like basic type of system where like you can add any type of thing that you want. Render it, move your camera around, and it's a whole different type of figure with very little effort since you have already that set up. All right. I hope that has been useful. If you have any question, just shoot a comment, shoot an email, whatever you want. But hopefully that's useful.